Hi everyone, welcome to the session. My name is Haley and I'm the Head of Adult Services at the Grande Prairie Public Library. I'd like to just take a quick second to acknowledge that this presentation is coming to you from Grande Prairie and that this is the homeland of the many diverse First Nations and Métis people whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial, and I am very grateful to work, live, and learn on the traditional territory of Treaty 8. So the title of this session is We All Bleed, Finding Your Passion Project to Serve Your Community. And if you have a good memory and remember the description of this session, you might be wondering about the title a little bit, as I'm going to be talking a lot about periods, and not everybody experiences those. I want to make a point with the title, which is that we all bleed, we all have blood in our bodies, we would be dead if we didn't. The difference is that some of us also happen to bleed from our vaginas. And those are the people I helped with my project, and I'm hoping what I talk about today will help you find your own passion projects to better your community and help others. Also, please don't be offended by the word vagina. It's human anatomy, and this is a session about periods, so vaginas are a common theme throughout. Basically, the purpose of this session is just to present my experience regarding how I found my passion project and help serve my community, and some tips on how you can hopefully do the same. So just going over the outline here, first of all, I'll be talking about Project Full Stop and how we implemented that at GPPL, as well as some of the different things we learned and some of the challenges we faced in regards to the project. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to choose your passion or cause. And finally, I'll talk about developing a project of your own and how to go about finding funding, applying on grants, and all that fun stuff. So Project Full Stop got started when my boss, our director, Deb, passed along a grant opportunity to myself and our teen librarian, Bailey. Yes, I'm Haley, and then there's Bailey. So Haley and Bailey worked on this together. Deb had been made aware of the grants by the Northwestern Alberta Community Foundation, and she thought it was something we might be interested in applying on. The grant was provided by RBC, and they were looking for applications that had youth from the ages of 15 to 29 working with an organization to answer one important question. And that question was, what is your boldest idea to respond to an urgent local need? So Bailey, Deb, and I had a meeting to try and figure out our answer to that question. We talked a lot about the different needs of those in Grande Prairie, and for our community that included things like shelter and food security to help our street engaged population, which we believe is quite high. I'm going to segue into something slightly off topic here, but I thought it was interesting to include. So our homeless or street engaged population numbers don't sound high. According to the point in time count, which is conducted every 2 years in conjunction with the City of Grande Prairie and a provincial network on housing and homelessness, they counted 228 homeless individuals in 2018. That seems like a small number when you consider the population of Grande Prairie, which is just over 63,000 people. And in fact, it only accounts for about 0.4% of the city's total population. Unfortunately, gathering statistics for street engaged individuals is really difficult. You can't just group some data sets together on a computer screen and call it a day. You have to coordinate around the different homeless agencies in the community, such as emergency shelters or transitional housing, and even then it really only offers a snapshot of the homeless population on a given night. So while the homeless population in Grande Prairie looks small, it's actually probably much higher than 228 people. Those are just the ones who made it into a homeless shelter that night. It doesn't account for the people who sleep in public spaces or who might have found a couch to crash on for the night. And if the survey was done in the summer, a lot of these street engaged individuals may have been sleeping outside because the weather was nice. So it's just food for thought in regards to statistics and a marginalized group like the street engaged. Something else to consider in regards to homelessness and Grande Prairie's public library, we're located 450 meters away from the city's largest homeless shelter. These are our customers. Most of them come into the library daily, either because it's somewhere free and warm or because they want to use our computers to job search and contact friends and family. We're the next logical step for these people trying to make it through the day. And so for us, that made it really easy to decide we wanted to do something to help them. They were the urgent need we wanted to respond to. So we have the people we wanted to serve, but we couldn't do a lot in terms of shelter or food security because the grant was for up to $15,000. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but in terms of purchasing food or constructing shelter, it probably wouldn't last very long. So we thought about what else we could do with $15,000 to serve these at-risk individuals, and that's when the topic of period poverty came up. So providing free pads and tampons has been a new growing trend in Canadian libraries in the last year or so. I'm not able to pinpoint exactly why this trend started in 2019, although I do have a theory. So while I was doing some research for this project, I found a news release from the Government of Canada from May of 2019. And in this news release, the government decided to publish a notice of intent in the Canada Gazette to seek feedback on the possibility of providing free menstrual products in federally regulated workplaces. And this news release had this really great little quick facts section that highlighted some really important information, which I'm just going to read out here. So the first point is current regulations under Part 2 of the Canada Labour Code require employers to provide supplies such as toilet paper, soap, warm water, and a means to dry hands. The Government of Canada is considering adding menstrual products to that list. And the second point says menstrual products are essential to the health of employees who use them, who comprise approximately 40% of the federal workforce. The cost of these products varies significantly by location in Canada, and the financial burden is borne exclusively by menstruating employees. The cost may be unaffordable for some employees, while others may not be prepared for their period, resulting in a disruption of their daily lives at work. And so my theory is that some librarian somewhere stumbled upon this press release and thought, hey, can't libraries do this? And so libraries started offering free pads and tampons in their washrooms. And that's just one of the reasons why I love our profession. We just happen across stuff like this, and we just figure out a way to solve it at a library level, and I just think that's so great. So I'm going to go over a few examples of specific libraries doing this, and I'm also going to mention how these libraries are funding their projects, so just try to keep that in the back of your mind because it'll come up a little bit later. One of the early libraries is Halifax Public Library, and one of the really great things about Halifax Public Library is that they've actually been discreetly providing free pads and tampons to their patrons for years. They just had to ask. But they've since decided to provide dignity for anyone who found the need to ask a barrier, and they've done this by putting the products in washrooms so nobody has to ask anymore. As for funding, Halifax Public Library has chosen to make this initiative part of their operating budget. Next, we have a division of public library branches in Kings County, PEI, offering free pads and tampons in their washrooms. They funded their project through their local Rotary Club, but have also placed collection boxes in their libraries, although I wasn't totally sure on whether the collection boxes were for money or products. I imagine it would be products, but I'm not 100% sure. And just as an aside, Rotary Clubs are really great places to get funding for your projects. So if you happen to have a local Rotary Club, reach out to them. They're always looking for local organizations to do presentations, and that'll get your foot in the door, and it'll also bring some awareness to the library that many of their members probably don't have. The last example I'm going to give is Kitchener Public Library, which is located about an hour away from my hometown, Ontario, fun fact. They started the Period Project, which sees free pads and tampons in their washrooms, and while they accept donations for their project, they have also integrated it into their operating budget. Kitchener Public Library's project is particularly interesting to me because the project came into existence shortly after their city council decided not to move forward with funding free pads and tampons in the washrooms of city-run facilities. So as usual, libraries are tackling issues that get discarded by others, and it just makes me proud to be part of that, and we should all be proud to be doing that kind of work, I think. After finding out about all these other libraries offering free period products, we thought we could do something similar and maybe even something larger scale with $15,000. So in true librarian fashion, we started doing our research. We wanted to understand the issue of period poverty as much as possible, because as 3 white librarians with privilege, period poverty was not a relatable issue that we ourselves were experiencing. You know, maybe during our undergrads or earlier points in our lives, but currently all 3 of us could afford to buy pads and tampons. So during my research, I found this really nice detailed survey from 2018, so pretty recent, that broke down some really important factors associated with period poverty and periods in general, which I'm going to go over here. This survey was conducted by Plan International Canada, which is a development and humanitarian organization that advances children's rights and equality for girls. All right, I want you to pretend that you're 25 or younger. Sounds great for some of us, I'm sure. And that you have one person on either side of you, 6 feet apart, of course. I want you to look to your left and then look to your right. And you or one of the imaginary people you're sitting next to can't afford to buy pads or tampons, and that sucks. So most of us who experience periods, about 83%, say that their period has prevented them from fully participating in activities. And 70% of those who have periods say that they've missed school, work, or social activities as a direct result of their period. And I'm part of that number. I know I've called in sick before because I've been curled up into a ball, hugging a hot water bottle, shoving chocolate into my face because my cramps have been so painful. And I've had a lot of coworkers with similar experiences. Periods can just be real jerks, and I think it's really important for us to be empathetic to those who might suffer from pain during their periods. Okay, let's take a look at what happens when periods hit. 74% of menstruating individuals have had a period leak occur at school or work. 86% of those who experience periods have been unprepared, and I think most of us have been in that situation. You just get busy with life and you forget, or maybe your period comes early or late, and when it decides to show up, you don't have products ready to go. You know, whoops, it happens. If this session was in person, I would do a room survey and ask those who have experienced a time when they've been without period products to raise their hand, and I'm sure a lot of us would raise our hands. I know I would. I can remember one particular time I was at the airport and I got my period. And I had nothing on me, and for some reason, neither the convenience store inside the airport nor the bathroom had any products. And let me tell you, that 3-hour flight home really sucked. Having to wait until you can hit the store or ask to borrow a pad or tampon from a friend is annoying. You know, wouldn't it be great if all public washrooms had pads and tampons freely available to everyone? Let's talk a little bit about period stigma. We'll start with a fun fact. The word taboo comes from the Polynesian word tapua, which means menstruation. And to me, it's interesting to see stigma entrenched in language like that, as it gives us some really fascinating clues about how society viewed and treated different topics at certain points in history. Obviously, periods were considered a no-no topic of discussion. And that's something I want to change, so let's talk about period stigma. We'll start with one of my least favorite terms, PMS. So in this survey, 57% of respondents indicated that they had been accused of PMS. And to me, saying someone has PMS is just accusing them of acting the way they are because they identify as a woman, because they have a vagina, or because they experience periods. Now, PMS is a real thing, and symptoms can include things like irritability and mood swings. That's a fact. What I take issue with is being accused of PMSing by someone who doesn't have intimate knowledge of my period and its schedule, yet somehow feels entitled to make a comment about it and my body. That's not okay, and I'd really love for that to not be a thing. So that's my little rant about PMS and PMS stigma. Jumping back to our survey here, 2 out of 3 people surveyed felt that they needed to hide a pad or tampon if they were bringing one to the washroom. And up until pretty recently, I was guilty of this. I used to try and hide pads up my sleeves or my pockets, anywhere as long as they weren't out in the open. I've since stopped doing this, but I believe it goes back to a cycle of shame surrounding periods. And if we're wanting to break that cycle, we need to stop feeling ashamed. And how do we do that? Well, we have open discussions about topics like period stigma, we learn about the stigma, and we work to change our attitudes and mindsets. So don't worry about concealing your pads or tampons when you need them. So I want to just take another minute here and do another, kind of virtual survey. Have you ever been accused of PMSing? How did that make you feel? Just want you to sit with that for a second. It's been a long time since anyone has asked me if I'm PMSing. My partner is smart enough to know not to do that, but it has happened, and I always remember being annoyed by it. There was much eye rolling involved, and I wish I had a rapid response kind of ready to go in the back of my pocket that I could share with you so that you know what to say when you are accused of PMSing, but I don't. If you do have one, please email me because I would really like to know it. That would be great. Now that I'm fired up from talking about PMS and stigma, let's talk a little bit more about the actual project. So at this point, we had done our research and we had our stats. I was ready to be a voice for period poverty. We filled out the grant application and then we waited. And after a few months, we received notice from the Community Foundation that not only were we getting the grant, we were getting the largest amount possible, $15,000. And so I was really excited. It was the first grant application I'd ever worked on, and we got it. We then had an announcement of the project and the grant at the library, and I gave a short speech about how grateful we were and did a few media interviews with the local radio stations about the project. That was terrifying. And then I got to work right away. We found this company called Ant Flow, and they sell pads and tampons in bulk, and so we're able to get 500 pads or tampons for about $125 US. And they also sell dispensers, so we ordered a bunch of those. And one of the really awesome things about Ant Flow is that for every 10 pads or tampons sold, they donate one to a nonprofit who distributes the products to people in need. So not only are we enacting change on a local level, but it has a widespread effect as well. So we put in an order for supplies and in the meantime started working with a local graphic designer to come up with a logo for the project. And so you might be wondering why I want a logo for the project, and I have several reasons. The first is that I knew right away that I want this project to become a permanent fixture. I want people to be able to come into GPPL's washrooms and get free pads and tampons forever, not just until the funding runs out. And a logo allows us to create a brand, and a brand allows us to craft an identity. And identifiable causes get funding and have staying power. My second reason for getting a logo was that I wanted something that would also link back to the library because this is a library initiative and project. And we were really fortunate to be able to work with the same graphic designer who developed our logo a few years ago. And so she was able to incorporate elements of that design into the Project Full Stop logo. You'll notice the tiled square effect we use is present in that logo as well. And the last reason is that I think a logo really lends credibility and gives a nice professional polish to the project. We received the dispensers and period products after a few weeks and we're ready to launch in early December. Because we're housed in a city building, we were able to get the facilities management department to install the dispensers in all of our washrooms. Although we ended up going with simple baskets in our upstairs washrooms as they are only accessible to the public when we have programs in the nearby room, so we did save some money that way. And I didn't really know what to expect when I posted about the project to our social media channels. I was hoping the post would do well and the comments would be positive, and I had responses kind of prepared for what I figured would be the biggest criticism, which was, why are you putting these products in the men's washrooms? And I was blown away by what actually happened, which is this. So here's a screenshot of our post launching the project. I kept it pretty simple. I threw in some blood drop emojis and some pictures, but let's get to the comments, which for the most part were really positive. But I do have a great little story ready for you. So here in the top left, we have one person comment with a question, which is this. Just curious as to why men/boys need this in their washroom. Okay, like fair enough, I'm happy to answer that. But before I do, 2 other people answer that question with essentially what I was going to say, and they say, because some men deal with periods, #transvisibility, and why not? Then our original commenter comes back and says, strange, I swear only women got their periods. I'm pretty sure actually, only women have uteruses, not men. And at this point, I'm kind of rolling my eyes, but I'm working on a response. But again, before I can post it, people start replying, and here's what they had to say. I've asked my brothers and boyfriends to grab me menstruation products at various points in my life. Boys need to be aware of and deal with this stuff too. I told my son he should carry a pad because even if you don't menstruate, you can be an ally. Everyone should be taught about it, be aware of it, it's a fact of life. Not everyone with a uterus identifies as a woman. OMG, you guys are freaking heroes. That was my favorite comment. And I was just super impressed with what they had to say because they were so polite and responded in such a positive way. And wouldn't you know it, our original commenter didn't post again. And so I was prepared to respond to comments like that first one, but I wasn't prepared for other people helping. And I thought that was something I would have to do on my own, and so I don't think these anonymous people on Facebook knew how much I appreciated what they had to say. And even the original commenter, I appreciated what they said or asked because it led to this really lovely experience for me. And now I get to use what they've said in a conference presentation, so it has a nice poetic justice ring to it for me. So just talking a little bit about the numbers in relation to that post. So on average, a post on our Facebook page will get between 600 and 2,000 reaches and around 100 to 200 engagements. And for those who don't know, reach is the number of unique people who see our content, and engagement is the number of people who take action on a post, whether that means liking it, sharing it, liking a comment, that sort of thing. So this post reached over 28,000 people and had nearly 4,700 engagements. So about 14 times as many reaches and 47 times as many engagements as a typical post on GPPL's Facebook page. I think it's probably one of our best performing posts ever, and I'm just really proud of that fact. So it's been almost a year since we launched the project, and just to give an idea of how it's been going in terms of successes, we've had over 5,000 pads and tampons taken from our washrooms. We spent a portion of the grant on new materials for our nonfiction collection in the area of sexual health. So I ordered books on combating period stigma, books on menopause, on topics like endometriosis. I just try to get a wide sampling of books that would really help beef up that area of our collection and go hand in hand with what we were trying to accomplish with the project. I've also had a number of different organizations, groups, and libraries contact me about how they can do something similar. A lot originally contacted me asking for donations, and that was something I kind of shut down mostly because the grant was only for us. So I didn't want to contravene that by suddenly funneling products to an outside organization on a regular basis. And so when I do get an email or phone call about how we can partner with someone on Project Full Stop, my response is usually, I'd like to, but unfortunately because we were the sole applicants of the grant, we're not able to work with another organization on this. However, I can tell you about the grant application process and even share my application with you so that you can apply for funding independently. And I am more than happy to send a copy of our application to people. It's not the 11 herbs and spices of grant applications. I don't want to keep it a secret. I want others to get funding for projects like mine. And the more places that implement projects addressing period poverty, the more people become aware of it, and maybe eventually period products will be freely available to everyone. But we don't get there if we do nothing about it. So like any project, this project has not been without challenges. Fortunately, the challenges have all been relatively easy to address. The first one is the filling of the dispensers. So my plan originally was for me to check the dispensers every morning and fill them as needed. This typically takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but clearly I wasn't thinking of how crazy my schedule was. Because I do manage a department of 7 full-time staff. I order for the library's fiction collection, and 25% of my work week is spent on the information desk answering reference questions. I do a lot more than that, but those are the things that take up most of my time. So while I try to check the dispensers a couple times a week, it doesn't always happen. Other staff sometimes help fill the dispensers, and one potential future solution I would like to look at is having the city's custodians fill them as needed when they do their cleaning in the washrooms. I haven't had to worry about the filling of dispensers as much with the pandemic and our washrooms being closed, but that's changing as we start to reopen. And we do have a sign with the dispensers that says if they're empty to let staff know, and we will fill them. The other issue we sometimes encounter with the dispensers is that people will occasionally clean them out completely, which is unfortunate, but my hope is that they're doing so because they need the product. That being said, we are looking at installing a time dispenser to help address this, and it would release a pad or tampon every 60 seconds or something to that effect, and we would have a sign saying, if you need more than one product, come see staff and we'll give you more. We realize not everyone might be comfortable with that, but there's kind of gives and takes with that situation. The second challenge is questions and comments we receive about the project. We do sometimes get questions and comments like that Facebook comment I showed you earlier, and some people get it and they nod and they understand, and others just kind of dismiss it and decide to ignore the fact that someone transitioning from female to male might still need pads and tampons. And a lot of people might feel uncomfortable talking about that, but I'm trying to normalize it by educating them and helping others get pads and tampons in all kinds of washrooms all over. The third challenge is probably our biggest. That would be funding. I got this grant and that's great, but money doesn't last forever. So I've been looking at other sources of funding to continue this project. And that could include more grants or asking for funding from community groups like Rotary, or it could mean absorbing the cost of the project as part of our operational budget. And I think all of these solutions are possible. It just depends on which funding requests are successful and which ones aren't. The fourth challenge is awareness. The project got good press and launched well at the beginning, but I've been trying to maintain the awareness of it by participating in an online learning series for youth who are interested in or have done projects like this, by presenting at this virtual conference. And the next thing I'm working on is designing some merch in relation to the project. So at the time I'm recording this presentation, it's in the very early stages, but what I'm envisioning is tote bags we would freely give out to people with either bleeder, former bleeder, or I love someone who bleeds written on them, along with our logo, the project's logo, and the hashtags for the grant. It's great free advertising, and I think the boldness of the bags would result in some good awareness and advocacy for the project. And hopefully by the time you're listening to this or watching this, the bags will have been purchased, distributed, and been widely successful. And finally, the fifth challenge was COVID-19. You never expect a global pandemic to hit and affect your project and your grant, but life is full of curveballs, and this is one that hit me right in the face. Because our library was closed, that also meant the library's washrooms were closed, and so people weren't able to take advantage of all the free products we had. So my workaround for this was to contact as many local organizations as possible, so all the shelters, the Friendship Center, the Center for Newcomers, and offer them a box or two of sealed products. We were able to donate about 3,000 products this way, which felt great because we were still getting them to people in need. We just weren't able to give it to them directly. And because we weren't donating the products to these organizations on a regular basis, it was just a one-time donation. It didn't contravene the grant agreement, which was an important consideration. So these were our challenges, and I think they were all solvable. I'm going to do a bit of a 180 here and switch gears to how you can make a project like this happen. And the first place it starts is with a Deb. You need a champion, someone who cares deeply about your library and is invested in its future, someone who wants to make a difference and isn't afraid of taking on new projects and being a shift disturber. This person says yes and lets you run at top speed without crashing into a brick wall. And for Grande Prairie Public Library, that's Deb. She's our library champion, and she's someone who has made really great connections with important local groups like the Community Foundation. And so she knew to pass on this grant opportunity we got about the RBC grant. And library champions just play a really important role in obtaining funding for your library, which will enable you to do cool projects like fighting period poverty by providing free pads and tampons. So maybe you're not lucky enough to have a Deb, and in that case you need to be your own library's champion. And there's lots of ways to do this. You can start by meeting with your local community foundation if you have one, and just let them know you're interested in receiving information about grants. You can look at projects from other libraries and follow the money to see how they're funded. Maybe it's through a grant you could also apply on. A good place to check for this information, if it isn't made obvious on a library's social media channels or their website, is their board meeting minutes. You can also see if there are any grants available through municipal and provincial governments. A lot of larger scale library projects are at least partially funded at the provincial grant level, although there have been a number of cuts to these types of programs in the last year and a half, so I'm not 100% sure what's still out there now, but definitely take a look at that. And just the most important step to becoming your library's champion is to have lots and lots of conversations with community stakeholders. So get to know as many stakeholders as you possibly can. And you might be wondering, who are these stakeholders? They might be senior management at other local organizations like your city or town's art gallery, the hospital foundation, radio stations, museums, etc. A good way to connect with some of these people is by joining a local group like Rotary, where many of them are members. And another good idea is if you do see newspaper articles about special projects going on in your community, just send a note to the organization congratulating them and maybe ask a few questions about the project. Take notice of where they receive their funding, like I mentioned earlier with the other libraries supplying pads and tampons in their washrooms. Just get on their radar, and who knows, maybe the next time they hear of a grant, they'll pass it along to you. And you can also do some local research and see which companies or organizations in your city or town give out grants. And a really useful tool for finding this information is Grant Connect, which I'm going to just give you a brief overview of here. So for those who don't know, Grant Connect is a database that provides you with grants from potential funders. A lot of libraries subscribe to Grant Connect, but it is important to note that because of the licensing terms, you're typically only able to access it on site at the library, so that's something to keep in mind. And what I've done here is just included a screenshot of the screen after you've plunked in a keyword at the top. So I've chosen the word sustainable, and I've chosen to search all causes in Alberta only, and that's given me 191 results. And then I can go through and use some of the filters on the left-hand side to narrow my results down. And I can also do things like specify the minimum amount of money I'd like to see and sort the results by different parameters, like application deadline, or if I want to filter by cause, I can do that too. And some of the causes Grant Connect lists that may be of interest to you include environment, education, social services, health, nonprofit sector development, and human rights, just to name a few. There are a lot of other filters that you can use to help you narrow your results, but I won't get into that because it'll take forever. I will, however, show you what a result looks like when you click on it. So this screenshot is what it looks like once you select a result from the previous page. You can see some really great detailed information about the organization that will help you with your application, like some of the key board members, their philosophy and mission statement, and some financial data, so you have a breakdown of the money they've donated before. Those tabs in the red box show you some other useful bits of information, such as what areas they've given money to and some really important details about the types of eligible projects. Typically, the application package isn't available on Grant Connect itself, but they usually include a website to the organization so that you can find it on there. And that's just a really quick overview of Grant Connect. One other thing I can suggest is that if you're lucky to belong to a library or library system that subscribes to Gale courses, they have a few really handy courses on there on grant writing. And having taken one, I can say that you do learn from them and they are useful. So be sure to check those out as well if you can. So now that you're on the proverbial mailing list for grants, you need to figure out what need you want to respond to. Sometimes the grant will help narrow this down. It might specify funding for environmental projects or projects related to infrastructure or staffing, so make sure you read the parameters closely. It would really suck to do a ton of work on a grant only to find out your project isn't eligible. The other thing a grant can do to help identify a potential project is limit your options based on the amount of funding up for grabs. So if the grant you're applying on is for $5,000, you're not going to be able to build a new wing in the library. But maybe you can start a community garden with that amount, or perhaps you can buy some iPads to loan out. The point I'm trying to make is that once you realize your limitations, you can start to work within them, and in some cases, they can be an advantage in helping you narrow your focus. So once you've got your limitations figured out, you can focus on the need. Ask yourself questions, ask what is needed in the community. Where are there gaps? If you don't work on the front line yourself, talk to staff at your library who do. Ask them what they notice about your customers. Is there something you could be doing that they need? Look at where you're located. If your library is in a school, is there something that some students don't have access to that you could provide? Maybe it's technology, maybe it's food. And I fully encourage a customer safari approach where you discreetly observe your patrons to learn more about them and their needs. Not for an extended length of time or to the point where you're being creepy and making them uncomfortable, of course, but just a glimpse to maybe understand how you can help them, because observing and learning will help inform. So you have the grant you want to apply on, you've got the community need you'd like to respond to figured out. Now comes my favorite part, because I'm a nerd, the writing of the grant application. And so first of all, I highly recommend that you create a folder where you can keep track of your grant applications by year. And this way you won't have multiple staff applying on the same grant, and all the information is centrally located, which will come in handy later for other applications, press releases, and other kinds of things. The second thing I recommend doing is having a file in this folder that has key information that is asked on almost every single grant application. So just a Word document that has the basics listed, such as the year you were founded in, the legal name of the library, which is often something involving the board. For example, Grande Prairie Public Library's legal name is the City of Grande Prairie Library Board, and your charitable registration number. It's also not a bad idea to have some boilerplate information about your library either, as a lot of grant applications want a basic overview of what your organization does, and that will often include things like your mission statement, your values, and your vision. Sometimes there is a word limit on that, but you can do around 2 paragraphs or so, just of information about the areas you serve, some of the programs you offer, a little bit about your collections and services, and it'll just make your life so much easier being able to copy and paste that information rather than having to write it from scratch every single time. Aside from that basic information, I really recommend using a mix of logic and emotion when you write your grant application. The people reviewing the grant applications will likely respond to one or the other, so I think it's important to appeal to human nature while also making a strong factual case for your request. Writing an emotional response will be easier for some people, and writing a logical response will be easier for others, but it's important to kind of step out of your comfort zone and include both. Because those who review the grant applications want to see that you care about the cause you're championing, but also that you've done your research and have objectively identified this need that requires a response. The great thing about the logical writing of a grant application is that it requires research. And who knows how to research better than librarians? Probably no one. I think it's always worthwhile to include statistics that will support your application. as numbers really speak to some people. And if you can get statements or stats from national associations that are relevant to your need, even better. So let's say you finish your grant application. It's got all the correct basic information. It's got some amazing emotional and logical writing. The last thing you need to do before submitting it is to have at least one other person go over it with a fine-tooth comb. They might find some typos or have some good feedback about things to include or take out. And just having that last look over from another person can really help make your application that 5 to 10% stronger and better your chances at receiving the grant. So you've sent off your grant application, and now comes the hardest part, the waiting. And that time frame can really vary. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. Sometimes the waiting period is tied to the amount of the requests, with larger requests taking longer to hear back about. But that's not always the case. It's always a good idea to make note of when you can expect to hear back by, if that's something that's disclosed in the grant application package or website. And this way you can follow up if you haven't heard anything and move on to applying for funding from other sources if the project is still something you want to pursue. So let's pretend you finally heard back and you've received the grant. Congratulations. You'll likely also receive a grant agreement, which is a really important piece of paper that you need to read very closely before signing. And the grant agreement will outline all your responsibilities as a grant recipient, and it also might include things that will be required of you, such as filling out pre- and post-grant surveys, using special hashtags and social media posts involving the grant and the project, and what you're allowed to spend the funds on. So it's absolutely critical that you're aware of the terms spelled out in the grant agreement and that you abide by them. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing your funding, and nobody wants that. So once you've read and signed the grant agreement, you'll want to have a plan for rolling your project out. This might include things like writing a press release, posting to social media, contacting vendors to discuss pricing and delivery of anything you might want to purchase with the funds, that sort of thing. It'll also likely mean communicating with your coworkers about the grant and how it might impact them. For example, if you're purchasing mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, you'll need to communicate with front desk staff about the boarding periods of the devices, the amount of data on them, that sort of information, because they'll need to know that. And finally, keep your project visible, because it's easy to start off with high momentum and visibility when you launch something, but it's also important to try and keep the awareness of it going as time passes, because this will increase your chances for future funding and the longevity of the project itself. And that's pretty much it. Rinse and repeat on as many grant applications as possible. The more grant applications you complete, the better you'll get at it, and it's kind of fun to keep a running tally of all the free money you score for your library. For me, that's a little over $100,000 so far, and my goal is to get to 1 million. So that's it for me. If anyone has any questions about grant applications or Project Full Stop or periods, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer them. But does anyone have any questions right now about the presentation?